Syracuse is stepping up.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. And of course, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, I was not planning to do another full podcast this afternoon, but guess what? We got some breaking news from Syracuse Athletics. They are creating a new fundraising campaign called Champion Cuse. We're going to break it all down in the next two segments in an FAQ type style, meaning frequently asked questions, and I will do my best to explain it to all of you. And then later on in the podcast, we will go over the implications of it, aka Syracuse men's basketball. You have no choice but to win games next year. There are no resources excuse next year. That's all I'm going to say for now about it, but we're going to touch on it later on in the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All right, so let's attack these next two segments in FAQ style. First question: what is Champion Syracuse? Here's what it is, according to Syracuse Athletics. It's a $50 million, $50 million fundraising campaign over the next 3 years. Now, I'm not sure if they mean $50 million total or if they mean $50 million annually. There is a big difference between the two. If we're talking $50 million total over the next 3 years, then that equates to an average of about $16.7 million per year in fundraising. And $50 million annually is exactly how it sounds. $50 million every year. That would bring the total to $150 million over the next 3 years. So I'm not exactly sure on that, but that is what Syracuse Athletics posted online. It is a $50 million fundraising campaign over the next 3 years. Second frequently asked question, all right? Who's raising the money? And there's a very simple answer to this, ladies and gentlemen. Syracuse is raising the money. Syracuse itself, not a NIL collective, not you, not me, not anyone else. Syracuse is the one raising this money. All right. Another question: where is the money going to? Because, if you donate money to this campaign, where is your money going to go to, right? It's going to go to two places. I'm going to combine the first one, and then I will tell you the second one. The first one is pretty obvious. If we're talking about Syracuse Athletics, where do you think it's going to go to? It's going to go to the players and coaches, right? You want to be able to retain talent, coaches included. You want to be able to attract talent, coaches included. So part of that money is going to go to players and coaches. The second place, as far as where it's going to go to, is facilities. Having nice facilities does many things for an athletic program. Obviously, it makes the athletes and coaches feel more comfortable when they are at home. So therefore, that should increase your probability of winning games. And number two, it helps recruiting when you have really nice facilities, right? Like, you don't want to walk into a locker room as a recruit. One locker room is just absolutely immaculate. It looks amazing. And then another school you go to, let's say, for example, Syracuse. I'm not trying to call them out here, but let's say you go to Syracuse and you look at their locker room and it's garbage, right? It's not even close to what that school's locker room is going to look like. So it's going to go to players and coaches. Let's combine that into one. And then also the money will go to facilities, maintaining them, upgrading them, right? And finally, really, Okay, we'll do another segment with more questions about this. But to wrap up this first segment, why is Syracuse doing this? Why are they doing it, right? Syracuse Athletics, they released in their statement 4 bullet points, all right? They talked all about why they are doing this. And I kind of alluded to some of the reasons why they're doing it in some of the other questions. But I can sum up their statement in 3 words. You ready? 3 words. To win games. That's why Syracuse Athletics started Champion Cuse. Because in this day and age, if you want to win in the revenue sports, we're talking football and men's basketball, if you want to win, you are going to have to spend money. It's as simple as that. If you want to win big, I should say, you want to be a Final Four caliber team every year in basketball, you want to make the college football playoff on a relatively annual basis, you got to be spending money because that's what other programs are doing. And that's why Syracuse basketball ultimately created Champion Cuse to win games. And I've been abundantly clear about Syracuse basketball because I don't want to sound like a hypocrite here. I've been very clear on this, that Syracuse basketball does not have the ceiling right now to be a actual Final Four contender. I'm not talking about making the tournament as an 11 seed and going on a miracle run like we saw NC State do last season. I mean, anyone can pull off a Cinderella. That's the beauty of March Madness. But I'm talking about an actual title contender, like an Auburn, a Tennessee, a Florida, a Duke. You get the idea, right? Syracuse basketball does not have the money, or did not have the money going into this season, to be on that level. They did have the money to be a lot better than what they are right now. There's a difference between the two. But it's kind of annoying going into a season knowing that your team really does not have the ceiling like a Duke or even Carolina in a down year, right? It's kind of annoying going into a season like that, knowing that your ceiling is probably an 8 seed at best in March Madness. Hopefully, Champion Cuse can help bridge that gap for not just Syracuse men's basketball, but for Syracuse football and all other sports. If you have any questions about Champion Cuse, I would love to answer them in the comment section below. So please feel free to put them down in that comment section. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse, and we are going over Syracuse Athletics' announcement of its new $50 million fundraising campaign called Champion Cuse. And don't worry, there's more about this, all right? So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. There was more that was said in the Champion Cuse campaign. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse. And on today's show, we are going over Syracuse Athletics' new $50 million fundraising campaign over the next 3 years. So let's get to more FAQs. First off, Syracuse will share its athletes the maximum allowed next year if the House versus NCAA class action lawsuit is approved. In fact, athletic director John Wildhack was pretty emphatic when he said that Syracuse will spend to the max. He was very emphatic about it. I will leave the link to the YouTube video where he said it to Matt Park in an interview this morning in the comments section below. Let's again attack this FAQ style. First of all, what is the maximum amount? Man, that is a tongue twister. What's the maximum amount Cuse would be able to give? The answer, $20.5 million. And that's for every school. Okay. Number 2, what's the House versus NCAA class action lawsuit? I don't want to get too into the weeds about the lawsuit itself, but I want to get really into the outcome and what you really need to know, what matters here. To put it in simple terms, if it's approved, the outcome is this. It allows colleges to pay its athletes directly through revenue sharing. NIL, by the way, NIL does not come directly through the school. It goes through a collective. It's a third party that will pay players, right? It's not directly through Syracuse University. This House versus NCAA settlement, the $20.5 million, will go through Syracuse University directly. It essentially means that now college athletes are semi-professional, if they weren't already with the current state of NIL. Another question, when would this begin? When would athletes be allowed to reap the benefits of $20.5 million? And the answer is July 1st, 2025. That's when all schools around the country will be able to spend a maximum of $20.5 million on its players, and I assume coaches as well, although I'm not entirely sure. See, I don't have all the answers. I'm trying to give you as much information as I possibly can in the most easily digestible way. This is a big one here that I'm about to answer, hopefully for you all. How does Title IX impact this? Title IX, all right? It's complicated and it's ever changing, but as of right now, and keep in mind, I am not going to be offering an opinion as to whether this is right or wrong, whether Title IX should or should not be impacted by the House versus NCAA settlement. I want to be very clear. This is me being neutral, all right? As of right now, I don't believe that schools will have to abide by by Title IX guidelines with this $20.5 million. I don't believe they do. I'm not giving you an opinion. I'm just stating the information that I understand it, all right? I think it's fair to assume that if Title IX has no impact on how the $20.5 million is spent, that the overwhelming majority of the money is going to go to 2 teams. It's going to go to the football team. They'll probably get the most. The second one will be Syracuse men's basketball. Plain and simple. Now, if the legislation changes and all of a sudden Title IX does impact the $20.5 million, either this season, or I should say in July 1st, 2025, or in 2026 or 2027, it could change where it all of a sudden does, and then you have to split up the revenue money a little bit differently. But as of right now, Title IX does not impact the $20.5 million. Also, is the settlement going to be approved? That's another question that is unanswered, right? Will the settlement be approved? Because, again, it's pending approval. We're still awaiting the court's answer. So it's really speculation as to whether or not it would be approved. Now, I'll give you my opinion on it. I think it will. It's a settlement. A lot of schools are preparing for it already. Now, you could prepare for something and then it doesn't happen, but you want to be prepared just in case. But I imagine that this will get approved. But again, we don't know because we're still awaiting the court's answer on that. And the answer, I looked it up online, should come around the springtime. So once again, on this podcast, we are talking about the new Cuse or the Champion Cuse campaign. The first segment, we went over specifically what the new campaign is. It is a fundraiser for the next 3 years to raise $50 million for Syracuse Athletics. And then on this segment, we talked about the other announcement that was made within that release, and that Syracuse is going to spend to the max, if allowed, or assume if approved by the NCAA in-house settlement. So hopefully you guys all understood that. If you did not, two things. Number one, you can comment in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer your question. Number two, I already told you guys at the beginning of the segment, I'm going to link a 6-minute YouTube video from Syracuse Athletics in the comment section below. I'm going to pin it right there, and it's Athletic Director John Wildhack further explaining what this is all about. He did a quick interview with Matt Park, all right? So I will link that in the comment section below. Coming up, we'll get out of the nitty-gritty for a moment, and we'll talk about the implications for Syracuse. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse. And thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Let's go over the implications of the new fundraising campaign for Syracuse Athletics called Champion Cuse. The implications. Number one, thank you. Thank you so much, Syracuse Athletics. I think we are all pretty much aware of this saying called better late than never, right? It's better to be late than never do something at all. Ideally, you want to be ahead of the game or at least on time for the game, but it's better to be late than never, right? Syracuse was definitely caught off guard with the changing landscape of college athletics and raising money and NIL. It's just a different world. And they were caught off guard compared to other schools. They were not as ready as the other ones. And you need to spend money to win games at a super duper high level. Period. And so thank you, Syracuse Athletics, for finally realizing that and stepping up your game. That's why I led off this podcast talking about Syracuse steps up. But with that, this leads me to number two. And this is probably the most important one, all right? More pressure, specifically on men's basketball. Now, let's talk about football for a moment. We can just get out of the way. I think for the football team, there's less pressure because they just had such a great season. There's pressure to obviously continue it going forward, but they just had a great year, right? There's always going to be pressure on football, though, because it's football. But for men's basketball specifically, it's tournament or bust next year. There is no resources excuse this offseason and next year when there are actual games played. I said earlier in the podcast that there was an excuse built into this season that if the Orange, don't go far into March Madness, right? If they're, a bubble team this season, you would understand that, or at least I would understand that because they do not have the same budget or resources like other top programs around the country. They don't. So, and I'm an understanding person to that extent. However, we weren't expecting a Final Four or anything like that. We were expecting this team to at least compete for an NCAA tournament spot this year. And, well, they should be a lot better than 11-16. And on the bubble for the ACC tournament, I might add. So with that, they are now investing more into the athletics. They are. They're investing more into the athletic programs, and that means for men's basketball, there are going to be more resources this offseason and next year in general. And that also means for Adrian Autry, there's really no excuse. I don't want to hear next year if this Syracuse basketball team is struggling that we're broke. I don't want to hear it. I don't. And I've been on record saying this about Adrian Autry. I don't want him back. I don't believe he should get a third year. But two things on that. I want to be wrong because I want him to succeed, right? I think we all want the coach to succeed, even if we don't believe in him. And number two, the reason why I'm really saying that is because I don't think they're going to let him go anyway. Even if Syracuse loses out the rest of the year and misses the ACC tournament, I think Adrian Autry is going to get a third year regardless. Which is why with Neil Adler yesterday, we talked about the 5 stages of grief that we're all going to have to go through if and when they decide to bring back Adrian Autry if you didn't want him to come back. But the reality is that Syracuse basketball next year, I don't want to hear any excuses about lack of resources. They better be in the NCAA tournament next year. They better. There is a lot more pressure on this program now than there was even 24 hours ago. I don't care if Syracuse basketball next year wins 28 games in the regular season. If the committee does not determine that's good enough for an NCAA tournament bid, goodbye. Goodbye. Now, obviously, that's extreme because if you win 28 games in a power conference in the regular season, you're going to be a 1 seed in March Madness. Worst case, you'll be a 2 seed in March Madness. So obviously, it's extreme, but it's meant to really point out this. Adrian Autry in Syracuse basketball won 20 games in his first season, in the regular season. All right? They won 20 games. And I thought that was a good start to win 20 games. But in year 3, I don't want to hear, oh, but they won 20 games. They didn't make the tournament, but they won 20 games. I don't care how many games they win. They just got to be in the NCAA tournament. Period. End of story. And hopefully after they make the NCAA tournament, they can either A, go on a deep run, or B, really it should be both, hopefully, they build on that season going forward. And they only get better and they only improve. So it's tournament or bust next year for Syracuse men's basketball. Period. End of story. So that's really the main implication from everything here. All right, coach, you're probably going to be back next year. You're on the hot seat. As far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, tomorrow, we got Poll Friday, and we will finally switch gears back to Syracuse football specifically. And the question for this week was, has Syracuse football improved its roster? So we're going to break it down tomorrow on Poll Friday. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March. Be the most informed college basketball fan right now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I should also point out with Locked On College Basketball, I hope a year from now they are talking about how great Syracuse basketball is and what an amazing turnaround Syracuse basketball had year over year. This is going to be a really critical offseason for the Orange as far as retaining whatever talent they want on the roster and also getting more talent. Because I will end off with this, all right, with Adrian Autry. Assuming he's coming back, right? He's going to have the resources. He's got a general manager in Alex Klein. Syracuse has to do everything in its power to give him no excuse, essentially. They have to do everything in their power to say, Adrian Autry, you better win. There cannot be any built-in excuses for next year. Okay? So with that being said, that is it for this podcast. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to like that podcast. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you could just do me a little favor, just tell 1 or 2 of your Syracuse friends about the Locked On Syracuse podcast so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And I will see you all tomorrow for Poll Friday when we talk about whether or not Syracuse football has improved its roster. Take care, everyone.